Okay, hi, my name is Alexandria, and today we're going to review some concepts from chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12 in preparation for our test. So to begin, in chapter 9, they mention a term called microfinancing, and this is defined as a practice to provide microloans to start small businesses with the intent of lifting the entrepreneur out of poverty. Another term for this is informal investments, and this is because in some countries there is a severe shortage of financing from venture capitalists or institutions such as banks or government agencies. And this lack of financing is a lot more prevalent in developing countries, though China actually has the highest informal investment of any country in the world, and it takes up almost 5.5% of their GDP. And now the actual amount of these microloans is actually pretty small, ranging usually between $50 to $100, which means especially now with the internet, just about anybody can get into these type of loans. Um, this is really showcased through an organization and website called Kiva that allows people to lend money via the internet to low-income entrepreneurs and students in 77 countries. And I have actually used Kiva through Enactus here at Spring Arbor when we decided to loan some of our profits out to women in developing countries to help them just stay away from human trafficking. So it really is just an easy way to help others through Kiva specifically. You aren't going to make money on these transactions because they charge no interest to entrepreneurs, which actually just helps them pay off the loan quicker in the long run. Um, Next. So our second concept comes from chapter 10, something called LLL advantages. Um, which, because of the widespread use of emerging multinationals, is starting to rival the OLI advantages. Specifically, it is designed as a firm's quest for linkage, leverage, and learning advantages. And as I just mentioned, these advantages are typically associated with MNEs from emerging economies. Um, so to start, linkage refers to emerging M&E's ability to identify and bridge gaps. Pearl River, the world's largest piano maker, has identified the gap between what its pianos can actually offer their customers and what price it can command. And given the negative country of origin effect it has to confront being from China, Pearl River's answer to this has kind of been twofold. Number one, they develop the economies of scale to bring down the unit cost of pianos while still maintaining that high quality. And second, they acquire and revive a different brand to reduce some of that negative country of origin effect. Um, and thus, Pearl River links China to other countries and just propels its global push. Second, leverage refers to emerging multinationals' ability to take advantage of their unique resources and capabilities, which are typically based on a deep understanding of the customer's needs and wants. For example, a search engine called Naver enjoys a 76% market share for internet searches in South Korea. It intends to leverage its deep understanding of Asian cultures and languages by charging into Japan. And in the long run, it also aspires to launch other culturally specific search engines, such as Naver North American or Naver Chinese American. So on a global scale, Naver's skills, obviously, they're not like really up to par with Google. But in certain markets, such as South Korea, emerging multinationals such as Naver have been beating Google because of those reasons mentioned before. So lastly, learning is probably the most unusual aspect among the motives behind the internationalization push of many emerging multinationals. Instead of like that I'm going to tell you what to do mentality, which is like typical of old multinational corporations, it's kind of um, new multinational corporations from emerging economies are openly saying that they're going abroad to learn. So for example, when India's Tata Motors acquired Jaguar and Land Rover, they just really expressed a strong interest in learning how to manage those world-class brands. Um, and really, especially to their like high executives, they just want skills in like transparent governance, market planning, and management of diverse multicultural workforces. And of course, there is a great deal of overlap between the OLI and LLL advantages. So the debate kind of boils down to whether the differences are fundamental, which would justify a new theory such as the LLL advantages, or just a matter of degree, in which case the OLI would be just fine to accommodate the new MNEs. And then next slide. So next, our third concept, collusion, comes from chapter 11, and it's defined as the collective attempts between competing firms to reduce competition. And collusion can either be tacit or explicit. Firms engage in tacit collusion when they indirectly coordinate actions by just signaling their intention to reduce output and also maintain pricing above competitive levels. So as you can probably recognize, this sounds a lot like price leadership. And one of the only concrete examples I could find for this was between the British Salt and then ICI Weston Point, which was another salt company. So what happened there was that there were effectively just two producers of salt in the UK, um, because mainly because of the large barriers to entry. So when an investigation was launched into both companies by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, they found that both companies were operating under capacity, but prices were still artificially high. So the MMC, excuse me, ruled that collusion was occurring to keep competing firms from entering the market and also to keep price competition very limited. And this diagram here kind of just shows the steps in tacit collusion, essentially. So one firm assumes the role of price leader, as I said. They set their own price, and then the other firms follow. And in this British Salt case, there's only one other firm, which was the Weston Point, followed British Salt. So British Salt sets an artificially high price, and then which allows firms to earn super normal profits. Um, and then this at the end just says, tacit collusion is often illegal, especially in the US, but it's difficult to prove because firms aren't talking with each other and coordinating with each other. Which brings us to explicit collusion. And that's different because firms directly negotiate and actually meet up to discuss output and pricing and the division of markets. So this is, of course, leads to cartels, which are also called trusts. And the most famous and accepted example of this type of collusion is OPEC, which stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is an intergovernmental organization of 13 nations, some sources said 14, for the purpose of coordinating and unifying petroleum policies to keep the market and prices stable, in addition to the amount of oil each country will provide. So the reason they're able to do this is kind of shown in this chart that I have here. OPEC countries produce over 3/4 of the world's crude oil, and for each of those countries to be competing in a price war would just make them all extremely unprofitable, actually. So that explicit collusion is kind of justified in that case, but some people are still against it and against OPEC. Okay, so for our last concept, acquisition, this comes from chapter 12, and it's defined as a transfer of the control of operations from one firm labeled the target to another firm, the acquirer. So the target becomes a unit of the acquirer. Even when referring to mergers and acquisitions, because acquisitions take up about 97% of all of mergers and acquisitions, a lot of people just use mergers and acquisitions interchangeably. Some famous examples of acquisitions include Pixar and Marvel becoming a part of Disney, and also Android being taken over by Google. The bottom fish picture or a chart really explains this well, as it's the first fish is a successful company looking to expand, and then the smaller fish might be a struggling company that would actually maybe benefit from an acquisition, or other times it can be more of a hostile takeover. But either way, the company acquires the smaller company and gets bigger. And then this continues and continues to happen. Like we make the joke that Disney owns everything. That's mainly because of acquisitions. In my MNC presentation, I also mentioned Coca-Cola. They have made many acquisitions in the last 100 years. So they own a lot of different beverage brands, which help grows their company and make them more profitable. So I think that is all I have. So thanks for watching and enjoying my presentation.